Welcome to this week's digital story. This week we're going to talk about the history of computers. There are 5 generations of computers. Computers started way before people started recording. Other countries have recorded having computers way before the 5 generations we are going to talk about here. The 5 generations will mainly talk about computers' invention in the United States of America. Lest we forget, we have come a long way to be where we are. So let's start looking at the 5 generations of computers. This first generation of computers was from 1940 to 1956. This generation used the vacuum tubes for the circuitry. These computers were very expensive to operate, and in addition, they were using a great deal of electricity and generated a lot of heat, which often caused these computers to malfunction. In this generation, the computers used the magnetic drum for memory. These computers were often enormous and occupied about 3 rooms, and they required 24-hour attention and a lot of human resources. An example of the first generation computer was the Univac. This was the first commercialized used computer, and it was delivered for business for the US government in 1951 as the first census machine. The second generation of computers was from 1956 to 1963. The invention of the transistor replaced the vacuum tubes and ushered in the second generation of computers. The transistors were far superior to the vacuum tubes, allowing computers to become smaller and faster and cheaper and more energy efficient and more reliable than the first generation. Though the transistor still used a great deal of heat and subjected the computers to damage, it was so much more an improvement from the first generation. These computers in the second generation also still relied on the punch card for input and output printouts. They also, in this second generation, the computers could now move from the cryptic binary machine language to more symbolic assembly language, which allowed programmers to specify instructions in words. The high-level languages were also developed at this time, such as the COBOL and Fortran. This first generation of computers stored information in memory, which moved from the magnetic drum to the magnetic core technology. The computers of the second generations were mainly developed for to build the atomic bomb. That was what the US did their research mainly for in the second generation of computers. The third generation of computers was from 1964 to 1971. This came about by the invention of the integrated circuit. The development of the integrated circuit was the hallmark of the third generation of the computers. The transistors were miniaturized and placed on a silicon chip called the semiconductor, which drastically increased the speed and efficiency of the computers. Instead of using the punch cards and printout, users were now able to interact with the computers through keyboards, monitor, and interface with operating systems. The computers had bigger monitors and bigger keyboards, and more companies were able to start buying the computers for their workers because the computers were getting cheaper and becoming more accessible. They were still very expensive for home use, but they were available in most offices, and they were normally called the desktop computers. The fourth generation of computers was from 1971 to the present. The invention of the microprocessor brought about the fourth generation of computers. In this generation, thousands of integrated circuits were built onto a single silicon chip. The Intel 4004 was developed in 1971, and it located all the components of the computer from the CPU, which is the central process unit, and the memory to input and output controls, all in that one single chip. Other companies have come up, such as AMD, Samsung, among others, that are in competition in making microprocessors. This invention of microprocessors continues to make computers that once huge, occupying enormous buildings, to just become small computers that can be found on your desktop. This is an example of the IBM AS400. You can see through the generation how smaller it has grown. Because of the microprocessors, computers for the first time became accessible to the masses because they were getting smaller and cheaper. In 1981, IBM introduced its first computer for home use, and Apple came up with their own version in 1984 when they introduced their Macintosh. Other companies continued to develop on this scale and started coming up with an on-the-go computer. This was the invention of the laptop. Those initial laptops were huge, cumbersome, and looked like briefcases. In the late 1990s, IBM was able to come up with one that was much lighter, that people could use on flight, in and out, and was much smaller. And this technology has continued to grow, making computers much more accessible. As we have seen, computers now are everywhere, in schools, at homes, and this also is because of the invention of the microprocessor, which allowed the development of the GUI, the mouse, and other handheld devices so that students can use these computers to do educational work as well as have games. Computers are everywhere. Everywhere we look in our home, we have computers. This is because the microprocessors continue to become very small and have compacted a lot of information and detail in just one small chip. At home, when we look around, we see a programmable thermostat. Anything that is programmable is a computer. Gone are the days when we used to sit around and quilt. You can now have a computerized sewing machine make a quilt. All you need to do is program it, have your design right there, and it will quilt your quilt. You do not have to sit around and do it. What about if you want to have a cup of coffee hot when you wake up? Again, computers are everywhere. All you will need to do is to program your smart coffee maker. It can be programmed because it has a microprocessor in it. Set it to your liking, and when you do get up, you can have that hot cup of coffee. AI, artificial intelligence. This fifth generation of computers is from present and beyond. The goal of this fifth generation is to develop devices that respond to natural language of input and output and are capable of learning and self-organizing. Many computers in this generation are still in development, though some of the applications are in use today, such as voice recognition. Voice recognition is where you talk to a computer and using whatever editor you like, you can type out every single word that you say. Also, other artificial intelligence that we have seen are the facial recognition, so you can log into your computer by just using your facial features, your iris, or your finger. All these are due to artificial intelligence. Humanoids are also an example of artificial intelligence. Humanoid robots has overall appearance of a human body and are based on interaction, allowing the robot to do some human deeds like hold human tools and interact with the environment. This is an example of a humanoid playing table tennis. We also have some other humanoid robots that are capable of having feelings, hearing, talking back, and also they are capable of thinking through thoughts of what has been programmed to them and coming up with a conclusion. A good example of this was Watson. You all saw Watson, I hope, win Jeopardy! Watson was a true showcase of what artificial intelligence can do. Watson was able to listen to questions, think through the answers, and answer correctly. This shows us the wave of the future, how computers will be able to interact with human beings. This is where we are heading. Now, to recap, gone are the days when computers occupied whole rooms and they were huge, cumbersome, used a lot of energy, and required a lot of manpower 24/7, 365 days. These days, you can find a computer that you can hold at the palm of your hand. No, just wait. Actually, you can hold a computer at the tip of your fingers. If you have a smartphone, this is a computer at the tip of your fingers. We know computers have become much smaller than this. We are able to put them in our animals to be able to detect when they get away from us. So computers have become so much smaller. Thank you for listening to my digital story. I do hope you will consider making a digital story for your next class project. Thank you very much.